Can you share an example of a time where you successfully shared your story of lived experience with a youth or young adult?
I have been grateful enough to be put in an opportunity where I am able to use my story to help somebody else. I sat with this youth and I said, "Hey, like so and so had mentioned that you need help with this. I would really like to help you with this. If you would, want that. If that's something that you would like, I would be more than happy to help you with this." And I had that opportunity to share my story and say like, "Hey, I know what it's like when you're not getting support when you need it, and I'm happy to provide that if you let me. Just that all they have to do is open the door and we can do what we can do together. Your success is my success."
I am a very happy person. So, surface level, you wouldn't see that I struggle with anxiety or depression. You think I'm just like a typically functioning, happy, well person. So, there's a lot of power that I found in strategically sharing about those experiences and saying, I almost didn't pass a couple grades when I was in school, or like a lot of different things like that. And people are like, "What? You look like you'd be a straight A student," or, you look like you come from a perfect family, not like a broken home. So I've been able to share about my past and my struggles. Sometimes it's just like a good segue in the conversation, and sometimes I'll ask them like, "Hey, do you mind if I share about something?" And it's really helped kind of give them the perspective of everybody coming from different backgrounds, and you really can't judge a book by its cover, because I mean you can, but you probably won't be right about it. Breaking that down, and with that, like, being able to show them that even though I seem really happy and whatever, well, um a lot of times I'm not, and that truth helps kind of translate into how they see other people. Sharing about myself helps them see, these other people have stuff going on too. Like, they are probably battling through a lot of stuff on their own that you can't see. So sharing really helps break down that immediate judgment, and it helps like build space for empathizing and like understanding other humans, and like we've all just got our own stuff.
In your experience, what are some of the benefits of sharing your story with youth and young adults?
I definitely think that sharing about yourself, it really, really, really helps build the rapport and build trust with the youth, because a lot of times, like, a lot of the youth I've worked with, they see a lot of workers. There's a lot of turnover of their therapists and support people. So on some level, like, I'm just another grown up, another person coming in to talk to them about their struggles or what they should be doing or whatever, like, idea they have of it in their mind. Sharing about myself and, describing different aspects of my mental health or what I've gone through, it really helps build that trust in showing like I'm just a real human. Like, I'm a real person, just like these other people are, just like you are. I've experienced from the youth sharing about it, and from my own perspective too. A lot of times our mental health professionals or doctors, they kind of seem like robots. Like, they're just like people there to do the work and to share their knowledge. But sharing about your personal experiences helps build that personal connection and makes it feel like special and deeper, and like it really paves the way, I guess, for good conversations, like deeper conversations. This youth has told me, you sharing about yourself and like getting to know you has really helped me drop my mask. Because a lot of times, people, and I can relate to this too, showing up in my own therapy meetings and almost wanting to, like, showing up how we think that that person wants us to show up. So like I would go to my therapy meetings and be like, "I'm doing so great. Look at all these things I've done, and like I'm not struggling with this." And I would like report it all to like sound good and look good, and like I would talk about my struggles, but very, kind of surface level. Um, and this youth kind of emphasized that and shared that like that was their experience, and they're able to drop their mask, is what they said, and be more open and honest and connect better. I mean, that it really helps build a good, just a really good environment for conversation and for um support and empowerment. I mean, And it's empowering to me too, because I mean, e- seeing the difference that sharing about yourself and about your struggles can make in a young person struggling themselves who thinks that nobody else struggles, like it's really empowering. It's really cool.
Sometimes sharing your own story can be a little bit intimidating, right? Because it can be hard. It can be just as hard for us to have to revisit some of the things that have happened to us in an effort to support somebody else. But I think the biggest benefit there, and like I said, as intimidating as it can be, I think all of that anxiety or worry is flushed away when you see the relief in somebody else when they realize that they aren't the only one. Especially when, you know, a lot of the time we're a little bit older than some of the youth that we work with, because I work with kids from like middle school to, you know, late high school. But just to be able to like, hey, look, I've been where you're at. Um, and there's a way out of it, and it does get better, um, and things can turn around. I think when you see that like wave of relief in a youth, when they feel, when you see that hope that like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels this way. I'm not the only, because that was a big part of my journey, was like I felt like I was the only one in the entire world who had ever felt like they were alone or unsupported, or so yeah, just getting to see someone else realize that they get to experience that hope and go like, oh, it's cool, it's not just me, is like, it makes it all worth it. There's still so much stigma around so much stuff with mental health, and there's so many like I grew up in a home that fully did not, like, they didn't believe in mental health. Like they didn't think like mental illness, like depression and anxiety was like, go for a walk, go eat an orange. And you're like, that's, it's a good orange, but it's not gonna do anything. Like I'm telling you, please. And you know, it's still prominent, so it's really great that we get to take apart and like breaking apart a lot of the stigma that is still built around mental health, you know?
What are some of the boundaries you keep in mind when you're sharing your story with youth and young adults?
I think the most important thing about strategic storytelling is that you have to remember, even though it is your story, it's not about you. It's not about me. And not a little bit, even for a second. In my mind, it's related to the saying that like only sharing your story with those who deserve to hear it, you know, and for us, that means, you know, sharing our story with those that we feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable with. It's not the opposite, but I'll say it's the different side of a same coin. It is your story, but you're using it as a tool on your tool belt. I am here to share my story so that you understand that there is hope, or that you're not the only one, or that, you know, someone else has gone through this and made it out the other end. I try not to get too far into details. You share what is important and you share what's relevant. And that can take a little bit of learning. I've been in this spot or two where, you know, I've overshared just a smidge, and I'm like, ah, we're gonna backtrack that real quick. We're just gonna pull back on that just a little bit. But it takes practice. But that is really my biggest thing when it comes to boundaries. Is like strategic storytelling isn't about me. You share the details that are relevant, and do it to some benefit. Do it with a goal, not just to share it. I found in my experience it can be, a youth could feel invalidated if you're just like, oh yeah, yeah, me too, you know, and they're just kind of like, yeah, but you don't get it, you know. So share your story with purpose. That was one of my big challenges, because I feel like there's, I mean, obviously there's only so much that we can be prepared for. A youth peer I knew went and had a youth peer support meeting, and this youth had done a drug deal in front of them, and it's kind of like, I have no idea what I am supposed to do right now. Like there's like, you can only be so prepared before you just get thrown in. You're like, oh yeah, I guess we're gonna figure this out today.
Asking yourself, like, why am I sharing this? What am I getting out of this? Something that I think about throughout my sessions, like it's not a conscious thought, but it's just like a thought that's there, is like, how am I going to document this? What we do kind of has to be, I don't know, purposeful, I guess would be the good word for that. Like we can't, we're not supposed to share about ourselves to benefit ourselves, or to, take the spotlight, or to, I don't know, there's so many different things that like reasons why you shouldn't share about things. And a lot of times too, sharing about yourself on some levels can break the rapport or shift the rapport. We're professionals. Like it's a really fine line that we walk as youth peer supports, I think, because we are very close to what a friendship would look like, but we're really not a friend. And I think on some levels, sharing about yourself to some extent, or maybe it's the delivery of it, it can really make you seem like friends. I've been in a couple different scenarios where it's like I can feel, not that I can feel the respect shifting off, but it's like I feel like they don't take me as seriously on some level, which I guess isn't necessarily a bad thing either, because then maybe they're going to talk to us more. But you have to keep in that professionalism and the boundaries. And again, yeah, why am I sharing this? What is the purpose here? Is it to build them up? Is it to give them, a different perspective, or different things like that?
Do you have any experiences where sharing your story didn't go as planned or wasn't as well received as you'd hoped?
I think about what I say a lot before I say it, and then I feel like sometimes it doesn't come out how I want it to. And then after the fact, of course, you always think of, that's exactly how I would have said it. Being more intentional, or if I'm not sure, just like staying quiet and listening. Because I don't know that you can really go wrong with that a lot of times. Just giving them more space to share themselves. Maybe they aren't in a place to hear about it. That's a lot of times why I'll say, hey, do you mind if I share about this experience that I've had, or about my perspective in this specific example? I have a youth who is very um I don't snarky, I guess. He doesn't really have a filter for what he says. I'll, briefly share about myself in conversation. And I remember it was when we were very first working together. So the rapport wasn't great yet, but I had shared something about myself, just very lightly. And I don't want to say he made fun of it, but it was kind of like m- kind of mocked, like dismissed. It did not go as I intended. And I'm like, well, note to self, this youth might not be open to hearing about my personal experiences or about me at this point. So that, I guess, kind of really helped build my ability to read the room and see, yeah, where they're at, and what they're willing to hear me say.
All the time, all the time. You will miss the mark. It happens, but it's part of the job. Like I said, strategic storytelling, much like something like active listening or empathy, like it's a skill. You will understand it more the more you do it. It's so hard for me to just like take one example because, like I had mentioned before, there's so many times where you're just like, oops, I've overshared a detail, or like so much of the time for me, it was just a really easy one where I think I'm strategic storytelling, but at the end of the day, I'm just saying like, oh yeah, I had that happen to me also. And it's like it's not validating, it's not supportive, because most of the time they're like because at that point you just become another adult who's saying like, I understand you, and they're like, no, you don't. Because that's the whole being a teenager experience, is everybody telling you they get it, and you're like, no, it's different now. And it is different now. I learn so much every day with every youth that I work with. So yeah, no, all the time, but it's how you learn.
What advice do you have for other youth peer support specialists when it comes to strategic storytelling?
I think the biggest piece of advice that I have for all YPS is prepare yourself to tell your story. The good, the bad, the ugly. Now do it again and again and again. Being vulnerable is the most challenging and the most rewarding part of this job. You'll see things in the field that will really, really hit close to home. Don't be afraid to lean on your own personal supports when you have bad days. When it comes to strategic storytelling, just prepare yourself, right? Because even for things that I had thought were like, this is totally safe, this is an okay thing for me to revisit that was a part of my story. And I mean, I've had meetings where I leave this youth's home and I sit in my car and I sob I sobbed for a good 15, 20 minutes on my drive home. But like that's just a big part of it. You will see things that hit really, really close to home to you, and just prepare yourself for that. You will dig up old emotions that you may not have been expecting. This job has a duality like no other, because on a standard Wednesday, my first meeting can be we talk video games and we play card games and we laugh and we have a good time. And then I go immediately from that meeting to a meeting that has ripped my heart out of my chest. Like just having your heart break for a youth that is in a tough situation. And that duality is like 20 minutes ago, I was getting my butt kicked at Uno, and now I'm crying with this youth.
When you're strategically sharing about yourself, you can always revisit the conversation. You can always come back to it and talk further about it. You can share more about yourself later. Or, just talk about it further. But once you say something, you can't take it back. And a lot of times, attempts to kind of smooth out what was said can really make it a lot more bumpy and rough and awkward. So my advice would be, yeah, if you're ever unsure about sharing about yourself, maybe don't. Maybe just stay quiet and talk about it later. There's been a handful of instances where I've used this. I had a youth and it was my first session alone with this youth. She was telling me about her history in foster care and some of the experiences um, from her foster parents that were really traumatic. And I was sitting there and I was thinking through, you know, debating about sharing about some of my own experiences or about myself. And I didn't want to. I told the youth at our next meeting, I didn't want to do that because I wanted to make sure you feel like it's at your pace. You can always revisit the conversation. And in that instance, like I revisited and said, I was quiet and I just wanted to listen because, like, that's an example of, sharing about anything or asking further might have given them some sort of feelings or like made them I don't know, I just wanted them to feel like it was in their power. Everything was at their control in their time. I have had instances where I've shared about myself to people. It's like regret of sharing so much. It's like, why did I say so much? Why was I so open with them? Or like just navigating the discomfort of being vulnerable and open. So I wanted, I guess in that instance, I wanted her to just be able to sit with that and know that it's a safe place to speak about everything. And that, sometimes I will ask questions and talk further, but sometimes I just want to be a listening ear. Um, and that like I prioritize their comfort over learning more or whatever it may be. My advice would be you can always revisit the conversation if you want to say more or, you know, share different perspectives on it, but you can't take things back once it's said. And yeah, trying to smooth it out sometimes makes it worse. And I've put my foot in my mouth a handful of times in that exact way too.